Everyone, welcome to the Town of Vesuvius Committee of the Whole meeting, April the 23rd, 2024 at 9 a.m. in council chambers. Could I please have a motion that the agenda is approved, and I'm assuming there are no late items, Mrs. Robinson? No, thank you very much. Councillor King, Councillor Chong, all in favor. Thank you. And the adoption of the Committee of the Whole minutes from April the 9th, 2024. Could I have a motion for that, please? Councillor Federica, Councillor Bennett, all in favor. Thank you. And we will move down to staff reports. And we're happy this morning to welcome the Director of Operational Services, Mr. Brownstein, and presentation on source water and treatment feasibility study presented by Stephen Horseman and Piero Galvano from Corello. So welcome, and please go ahead. And or did you want the report from Mr. Brownstein first? No. Okay, we have that as well. So we will let you go ahead with your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. I'd be here to share the results and kind of our analysis on looking at source water supply and feasibility for the town of Vesuvius. Okay, so we'll start by looking at the existing system, your existing infrastructure, understanding that in relation to then consideration of looking forward in the future, options available from a source perspective. And then look at different treatment considerations to compare what is the best long-term solution for the town moving forward, based on supply and treatment considerations. So the existing system relies on domestic groundwater wells. There's approximately 6 production wells in service. The groundwater supplies serve the town very well. I think historically. And it's a groundwater supply network where so multiple wells pumping into a common network directly into the distribution system. The system relies exclusively on chlorine for treatment, and there's distribution reservoirs in the east-west side of the system to balance peak demands and fire flow. Some of the challenges encountered with the existing system on the groundwater well pumping capacity, there's a shortfall in peak consumption in relation to the current pumping capacity. Some of that's related to the aging infrastructure within the groundwater well systems and limited pumping capacity, as well as a need for additional groundwater extraction points and wells going forward. Another consideration on the pumping shortfall, I think in context, is the lack of standby power within the groundwater pumping system. So in conjunction with
Stephen, if you'll just give me 1 sec, I've just been notified that the screen isn't working right, so I'm just gonna pause. Thank you.
Sorry, taking you way longer to.
No, that's okay.
So yeah. Closer as well, sure.
Let's try that again.
Sure.
Thank you.
From the top.
We'll carry on where you were.
Okay. You're right. So yeah, I think compounded with the shortfall in the current pumping capacity just being slightly below the peak consumption rate, which is presently mitigated with reservoir storage. There's also a lack of standby power, so that if there were power failures, either locally or more broadly within the system, there could be an incident of not having enough water to meet demand and fill the reservoirs. So another context, I think within the existing water system challenges, this one's less related to the source and more related to consumption patterns within the community. So relatively high per capita consumption within this community. Looking at other communities within the Okanagan, typically seeing anywhere from 500 to 1,000 liters per capita per day on average, with town of Vesuvius be quite a bit higher. So I think that's a consideration that's continuing to challenge the capacity of the groundwater system that you have in place. And that's consistent with other communities within the valley. It's very much driven by irrigation, domestic irrigation. So seeing a very high swing from seasonal winter demands to those peak summer demands, and combination of irrigation as well as tourism and hospitality service. So that's the current situation. Looking forward, additional wells, if the town were to continue using groundwater as the primary supply source, additional well capacity would be required. So I think testing wells were developed for well 9 and well 10 previously, and additional wells would be needed to meet the 2050 demand. We looked at 2 different scenarios that have been documented in previous studies with respect to a kind of a 2050 design horizon, one with conservation, one without conservation, and then kind of looking at a 1% to 3% range of potential population growth. For the analysis and planning purposes at this stage, and comparing the 2 options, we selected the midpoint midpoint growth scenario, and assumed that the conservation was not included in that number. And the rationale around that is from a planning and siting perspective, and kind of trying to make big decisions on major infrastructure. Having that, not knowing what you're going to get out of conservation, I think some of the targets that have been proposed may not be achievable over time. And so I think it'd be prudent to consider from a planning perspective sizing without conservation, and then be able to stage that back. I think over time, as you look at your whichever solution goes forward, having that provision to stage in response to what you're able to achieve through conservation. Also within the existing system, as I think folks would be aware, the manganese levels are high. In 3 of the 6 production wells, they exceed the maximum acceptable concentrations. That's set by Health Canada. And in 5 of the 6 current production wells, it exceeds the aesthetic objectives, which results in brown black water events that can occur within the distribution system. In addition, I think the 2 new test wells also exceeded that aesthetic objective. Another complication with the groundwater supply is in the presence of ammonia. So relatively high levels of ammonia were identified in 3 of the 6 production wells. As well as both of the 2 new test wells around well 9, well 10. Ammonia has it interacts with the chlorine efficiency and kinetics, and so it impacts your ability to oxidize the manganese, as well as your ability to achieve a stable chlorine residual within the system. So it interacts with chlorine to cause some challenges with the treatments of the process. It also can be impacted by nitrification in the distribution system, and incidents of nitrate or nitrate levels in the system, which have some health effects as well. For groundwater supply, relatively high levels of organics. So we recommended organic level is 4 milligrams per liter total organic carbon. That's largely driven by the potential for disinfection byproduct formation. So that's the carcinogenic byproducts that happen through the interaction of chlorine and those organic compounds. And so in wells 3, 4, 5, and 8, exceeding that guideline of 4 milligrams per liter going in. And I think the town historically have, in their operation of the chlorine disinfection at the different well sites have been had to work fairly closely to be able to manage that chlorine residual in relation to trying to avoid generating high disinfection byproducts. So it introduces a challenge within the disinfection process and potential health considerations on the disinfection byproduct formation. Just looking at the groundwater wells and in relation to these different water quality parameters, I think it's helpful to kind of see the incidence with based on location and the different parameters. So well 1, relatively low manganese concentration, low ammonia, however high organics content. Looking at well 3, exceeding the manganese aesthetic objectives. below the ammonia level, but higher than exceeding the total organic carbon levels. And then wells 4 and 5, exceeding both the manganese maximum acceptable concentration levels, as well as the recommended ammonia level and organic total organic carbon levels. And then up at well 6, exceeding the manganese aesthetic objectives, but below the ammonia and organic carbon levels. And finally, well 8, exceeding both the manganese as maximum acceptable concentrations, as well as the ammonia recommended limits, and total organic carbon levels exceeding 4 milligrams per liter. So the blended water quality, if we pulled all that together and mixed into a common source supply, the manganese would be between the aesthetic objective and the maximum acceptable concentration. Ammonia levels would exceed the recommended guideline of 0.1 milligram per liter, and your organic carbon would be just below 4.4 milligrams per liter. Looking at the groundwater supply, I think the other consideration that's important to is the recent groundwater at-risk of decaying pathogens criteria, which is a relatively new. It was replaced by the GUDI guidelines, which effectively are an assessment or screening tool to understand the vulnerability of a groundwater well supply for interaction with pathogens, and so it looks at different exposure potential to surface water contaminants, ground to surface contaminants. So if you had a standby generator over top of your groundwater well, that would be a potential source of petroleum into the groundwater supply. Looks at wellhead construction and the incidents for surface interaction to infiltrate into that. And so looking at the town's aquifers and speaking with Western Water Associates, there's effectively two aquifers identified, one on the east and one on the south side. They're essentially similar, very, have been identified separately, but more or less have the same characteristics. They're shallow aquifers. They're heavily influenced by the surface water, so direct influence from the lake, as well as a direct influence from surface water activity. So ground filtration from irrigation has interaction with your groundwater supply. So I think these are, in summary, regardless of to continue down the path of using your groundwater supply system at a minimum, utilization of two forms of disinfection will be required. So that would include UV disinfection and chlorination, and that would be required at all well sites or at a common location that all the wells are supplied into. So in summary, with your existing system, on a source supply perspective, additional pumping capacity is required to extract more water to meet repeat demand as well as your future demands. The aquifer is considered a shallow, unconfined, highly vulnerable aquifer to surface water contaminants interactions. There's also a direct relation. The organics are an indication, or high organics in the groundwater are an indication of that influence and interaction with the surface water supply, or with the surface water source of Osage. And then finally, the relatively complex water quality conditions for treating the different parameters independently, and we'll get into that a little bit more when we look at the pilot data that was conducted both in 2017 and more recently in 2023, 2024. The conclusion, upgrades are required. The drinking water infrastructure, both at expanding the supply capacity as well as providing additional levels of treatment to meet both provincial and federal health guidelines. Town is fortunate to benefit from having access to two relatively good source waters. You have the groundwater source available to you that has served you well leading up till now, and then availability of a relatively high quality surface water source as well in the Soyuz Lake. And so in looking forward and making, in consideration of making significant capital planning for the town, it makes sense to decide what is the best source to invest in going forward. And so that effectively formed the basis of this study, which was to evaluate the feasibility of both supply and treatment considerations for the town, given the challenges with the existing system. So looking at the groundwater supply, some of the considerations from the analysis, so minimum level of treatment would be two forms of disinfection. So typically that involves UV disinfection and followed by chlorine disinfection. Complex inorganics, metal and ammonia concentrations have interaction with the treatment kinetics and chemistry that introduce some challenges that need to be considered. Also have identified perfluorinated substances, so PFAS or otherwise known as kind of rubber chemicals, have been identified and collected or confirmed within the sample. They have not exceeded the current guidelines, but are of note in consideration certainly from the groundwater supply, in that they have a long residence time and often stay around for many years. On the raw water supply, to meet the 32 megaliter per day planning capacity at 2050 design target, 5 new wells would be needed to meet that production capacity. Of the existing wells, many of those wells, as I mentioned, have been serving the town well for many years. And as a consequence, they're getting due for refurbishment to be able to meet the, to get another 50, 60 years out of them and to increase the capacity of the wells to meet the demand needs. Standby power will be required at the wells, which is a little bit more complicated in that all the wells are in different locations, so it'd be multiple standby power units needed to energize each of the offline or each of the wells. In talking to Western Water, who were involved, I believe, in the well 9, well 10 development, I think consideration. I understand there's limited land availability for siting new wells, so it become more and more challenging, especially when you're looking to add on 5 new wells. Consideration of where those wells are to be sited, and the land availability to accommodate that is a consideration. And then I think moving forward, based on the treatment requirements, both from the groundwater at risk of containing pathogens consideration, as well as the inorganic content of the groundwater, consideration of a common treated raw water supply is recommended to bring us toward a centralized treatment facility, rather than having several multiple treatment sites at each of the wells, or we're trying to consolidate multiple plants in a combination of 2 or 3 wells locations. Looking at the surface water treatment plant, the lake is characterized as relatively low turbidity, moderate organic level, with seasonal algae events that need to be considered within a treatment selection process. The surface water is somewhat typical, relatively typical, and similar to several of the surface water treatment plants out the valley. Also of note, PFAS was detected in most recent sampling. That the results haven't been confirmed, but are below the current guidelines as well, but something to track and keep an eye on. And then with raw water supply, so effectively for the domestic source, there is no domestic raw water supply infrastructure from the lake, so that would need to be new infrastructure to get water from acceptable location in the Osoyoos Lake into a centralized treatment similar to groundwater, and then into the distribution system. So at a high level, I think the irrigation intake 8 was identified as a suitable location for further investigation of that or development of that source water supply. So the design criteria I'll walk through. This really just sets kind of the framework for the analysis of the 2 options and considerations that went into development of those options. So from a water quality perspective, both options follow through on the 43210 guidelines, which are both federal and provincial guidelines for protection of pathogens and following a multivariate approach. The differences between the two systems, so relevant to groundwater, there's a target for ammonia reduction to manage the treatment process stability, manganese reduction, so that and metals reduction. On the surface water side, consideration to potential algae events and associated cyanotoxins need to be considered. And so there's both the cyanotoxin, which is a health consideration, and then there's the geosmin and MID, which are are related to taste and odor events that trace back to algae. As far as water supply, as I mentioned previously, for the basis of planning comparison of the two options, we selected the 2050 design horizon and 32 megaliter per day of treated water. And so that assumes that, you know, anything you gain out of consumption, out of conservation measures will be a benefit. And so from a planning perspective and looking at further development of the source water supplies, selecting that 32 megaliter per day is a reasonable and conservative assumption for planning purposes. As far as equipment configuration, and this just more drives kind of some of the decision making, what's, you know, how the layout and orientation of the process infrastructure within the proposed treatment and raw water supply components. As per the current BC building code, water infrastructure is to be built to post-disaster requirements, so that introduces a little bit more complexity in the structural design and construction of the facilities to be able to handle seismic events. Targeting zero boil water notices due to treatment upsets, so that establishes a certain level of redundancy within the process designed to be able to accommodate intermittent upsets within the process. And then continuous supply of potable water. So treatment train, you know, multiple treatment trains, having the ability for the residual treatment not to impact the production of treated water. And then similarly across all systems, having standby power both right from source water through to treatment plant, so that in the event of, you know, fires or other potential events or other things that can impact your power supply, that you're still able to produce water, get it into the system. From a siting of a new facility, it's important to plan for potential changes in your demand, potential changes in your water quality. So selecting a site that can accommodate you know, different future considerations is recommended at this stage. So that informed our approach to identifying a proposed site for that centralized treatment. So looking at the groundwater treatment option, if the option development was informed by pilot testing results conducted both in 2017 with look more specifically at just the manganese removal for selected wells. That was a Magneser treatment technology, and then more recently in 2023 and 2024, where the results of Brazil water nets and the broader enhancements of treatment technologies that are available for manganese removal. So within that, identified biofiltration, which is a common tool used for manganese removal, catalytic manganese removal, which speaks to more of the proprietary media technology. So manganese green sand plus green sand manganese dioxide and other types of proprietary media that targets those metal removals. And then organic absorption, this looking again to reduce the organics level as well as potentially deal with the PFAS. And then as mentioned, the base of 2 stages of disinfection following the treatment. So looking at the results of the pilot testing, I understand you've received a more detailed presentation on this. We'll just highlight on the considerations that informed selection of treatment process for the groundwater supply in this feasibility assessment. But they looked at 3 different treatment types. So green sand biolox, which are effectively the catalytic manganese removal, looked at biofiltration as well as ion exchange. And each technology was able to treat one of the parameters that was encountered within the groundwater supply, but none of them were able to deal with all of them at the same time. So there wasn't kind of a silver bullet within the quiver from the pilot testing results. So looking at the ammonia removal, it's probably harder to see, but the light green dots and murky green dots, those show the green sand removal, the green sand treatment train they would be coupled with chlorine addition. And so early in the piloting, you see this reduction below the target of ammonia for For the green sand, a lot of that's driven by the chlorine addition, and then it starts to veer off and rise back up over the course of piloting. Looking at the manganese levels, the green sand was able to remove the manganese levels kind of early for about half the piloting period, but then started to climb up again, showing some break off and sloughing of manganese as it continues to operate. So again, presenting some concerns with the stability of the manganese removal from that technology. And then looking at the ion exchange was really the only technology able to effectively reduce the organics consistently below 4 milligrams per liter. And then turbidity, which is less of a target, more of an indicator of particulate removal and protection from pathogens, showed effective removal both in the biofilter and the green sand and biologics treatment technologies. So based on analysis of the piloting data, as well as kind of industry practice and what you can reasonably achieve through these different technologies, we identified the biofiltration for removal of ammonia should be able to effectively, with the addition of aeration, to improve the health of the biological activity on the filter media, should be able to effectively remove ammonia. It will have some benefit to organics reduction as well as some benefit to manganese removal, but not, maybe not consistent or stable to be relied on its own. So we propose following the biofiltration with the manganese dioxide contactor, which would then effectively polish or scrub any potential manganese that makes it through the biofilter, would be caught by the manganese dioxide filter and removed. So that would effectively prevent any dark water events or seasonal breakthroughs. The other thing that I think came from the piloting data was indication of kind of the stability of the biofilter to be able to maintain treatment efficacy through ranges of flow variations, and so when you have a seasonal flow like the town has, biological filters stabilize over the course of days, sometimes 30 days, and so ramping up and down can be challenging for them. So again, similarly, the manganese dioxide contactor helps catch some of that breakthrough that would occur through stabilization of the biofilter. Identified optionally a GAC or granular activated carbon media that would effectively remove any organics that could be present in the system and reduce that disinfection byproduct formation, but also would focus on potential other contaminants like PFAS, which is becoming more of a consideration concern. And then, as mentioned previously, the inline UV reactor followed by chlorine disinfection. So one of the things to consider with this treatment train, I think previous analysis on the treatment for the groundwater supply assumed that you'd be able to pump through the plant and then directly into the distribution system. With the 2 stages of disinfection and the way that you kind of have to break head, or you have to break the pressure at the plant, and so then you got to repump anyway. And so all of that leading to having that common supply of raw water, one treatment location, you're breaking head. So and then either gravity back into the system rather than trying to have to repump. That's more really a consideration for the conveyance and piping side of it, but something to consider. Sorry, on the final treatment consideration on the groundwater supply would be waste equalization. So relatively easy to manage in the sense that these biofilters or pressure filters will backwash automatically, and short duration, once a few times a day to maintain the health of the filter. That's equalized in a tank and then can be discharged directly to sewer. We have a hydraulic impact to the capacity of the wastewater collection and treatment system, but from a quality perspective, didn't identify any kind of parameters of concern that would be going into the waste stream. Just a summary slide showing the ability of this treatment train to meet all of the targets, pathogen guidelines and treatment objectives, and which technology aligns with which parameter. just a brief comparison of previous considerations on groundwater supply planning. I think the basis of design was approximately 20 megawatt per day, so we're looking at 50% higher capacity just for planning purposes. And I think it's supposed to be on manganese removal. And so it looked at the aeration and the biofilter, which the pilot testing more recently showed challenges with being able to get that stability. And so this treatment train, the expectations of this treatment train based on the piloting data would see incidents of breakthrough of manganese and then the challenges around the ammonia and manganese removal hadn't been fully developed or considered within this treatment approach. It also didn't consider the 2 stages of disinfection. So again, proposed groundwater plant layout, approximately 1,600 square meter footprint. Again, these are conceptual level layouts, lots of opportunity to refine and configure this going forward, but we wanted to develop kind of general footprints for comparative purposes. You see the light gray is the basis of design, and then provision for future expansion with that granular activated carbon to help reduce the organics and potentially remove PFAS if necessary. So detail on the layout, the footprint. Just to speak to some of the previous considerations on siting, I think it's worth noting the original site on the east side of the lake, adjacent or near kind of well 3-4, kind of between well 3, 4, 5. We'll review that as a potential site, but based on the available land there wasn't sufficient to accommodate the anticipated treatment requirements. We also want to be careful in investing, certainly a centralized treatment facility, to be able to have a little bit of room to accommodate different both capacity and treatment challenges that could come up in the future. You know, given the significance of the capital investment. The benefit of this site obviously is it's closer to some of the wells, so you'd be able to have shorter transmission main requirements associated with it. So some of that, so that the reduced transmission main requirements would likely have informed some of the previous assumptions on costing, as well as the treatment train. I think having only one of the proposed treatment components included would have also affected the plan costs. So looking at the sites available, we focused on land that was either owned by the town in some capacity and could be reasonably utilized to accommodate a centralized facility for future treatment. We identified the golf course in discussions with town staff as a reasonable location, central location. There's already existing water infrastructure there with your main reservoirs. And so, and then having sufficient space to be able to expand and accommodate the potential needs of a future treatment facility. Looking at the groundwater conveyance network, so looking at tying each of those wells into a common system, the intention here would be to collect all of the raw water from each of the wells into a common groundwater conveyance pipe, and then direct that all to a centralized treatment facility where it can then be treated, discharged into the reservoir, and then gravity supply out into the distribution system as with the existing distribution infrastructure. Some of the considerations on the groundwater conveyance network, the majority of those pipelines are going to be in the town, so more of an urban impact, urban corridor and disruption within the town, just based on the location of the wells presently. And then some consideration to planning of those future 5 future wells, I think would need to be considered within that pipeline design. And so there's some variability or uncertainty in where those wells will be tying into. And so you would likely want to oversize a backbone of that groundwater supply network to accommodate, be flexible for different locations of the new wells. So based on the analysis and the cost estimate developed for that option, We estimated a capital cost of $61 million, with a class 4, that's a class 4 estimate, so the range on a class 4 estimate is -30 plus 50. That accommodates the level of knowledge that's available at this time in the study. So further, geotechnical investigations, changes in site locations, all these many factors or decisions that have yet been made could influence that cost within that range of 43 million to 92 million. Looking at the operational costs, largely driven by the raw water pumping costs associated with getting that groundwater into a common supply network and up to a centralized treatment center, treatment location. And then the equipment replacement costs and labor associated with running the new facility. Looking at the surface water treatment option, informed by the development of and selection of the treatment technology and training to support a surface water treatment plant off of Osoyoos Lake. Looking at clarification being required as direct filtration wouldn't be feasible given the potential for algae within the system. So algae have a tendency to get on the top of a filter and just blind it off. So you need a treatment process ahead of filtration to be able to remove one, the organics, but also the potential for algae and be able to take that out before so your filter can behave properly and work reliably. At the filtration technology level, you can look at granular media filtration or membrane filtration. I think given the incidence of organics as well as algae, membranes are less desirable. They don't like organics, even if we're able to reduce them through the pre-treatment process. Getting them below 2 would be required for membrane warranty. Additional organic removal and or PFAS, as we noted, it had been identified in the surface water and should be continued to monitor. So if additional treatment were required there, we identified powder activated carbon. Benefit of powder activated carbon is it can be used to address intermittent events. You don't need to run it all the time. You introduce it as and when needed to deal with specific event-based issues. And then microbial treatment, disinfection will be required. I think planning for UV and chlorination is based on recommendations from Interior Health on consultation to date. So looking at surface water treatment plants, the focus here is reasonably conventional, and it's a multi-barrier approach. So you're looking for multiple treatment processes to provide kind of a holistic protection. So if any one of them fails, and this is similar to the groundwater side, you have another barrier to interact and catch potential breakthrough or limitations of one barrier. As I mentioned previously, direct filtration wouldn't be possible due to the organics and algae concentrations. I think a point of note is that there's less comprehensive water quality sampling data available for the lake. However, the data that has been presented or provided to us to date is consistent with the other surface water sources up the Okanagan Valley chain. So looking at the treatment process train, so starting with the dissolved air flotation clarification process, that's the same technology that's implemented in the District of Peachland. District of Summerland has something a little bit similar but different, but achieves the same end. Rose Valley's recent water treatment plant utilizes this technology, as well as the City of Vernon. Yeah. Must be another one, but very common in Okanagan for surface water sources with relatively high organics, light organic content that needs to be removed, and low turbidity sources. As I mentioned, you would have the provision to be able to add powder activated carbon for enhanced taste and odor reduction. If you had an algae event and you had the geosmin and MIB released, you can use powder activated carbon at the front end of the DAF process to remove that, or organic or other event that required intermittent management. So following the DAF clarification, the clean water flows kind of down, dirty water flows up. So the clean water would flow out the bottom of that process and then onto granular media filters. I remember the other treatment plant that uses that. It's there's 2 plants in West Kelowna that use that, both the Rose Valley and the Powers Creek plant. The granular media filtration process would follow the dissolved air flotation. Granular media effectively removes out particulates and pathogens that can be present in the incoming raw water. Similar to the groundwater, I think consideration or planning for the provision of a GAC, so that would granular activated carbon, pressure vessel or gravity basin. And the consideration there is that if PFAS or other contaminants of concern become a problem, you have the ability to respond and address those in the future. And then similarly, the UV followed by chlorine disinfection. So the main differences between the 2 processes are really the clarification process in granular media filters in relation to the pressure vessels. And so the DAP clarification and granular media filtration are focused on organics reduction as well as microbial treatment and very conventional treatment processes, whereas the groundwater system's focusing on the inorganic parameters present in the water, trying to get the metals and ammonia reduced. On the surface water treatment plant, so one of the more complex components of the surface water treatment plant is the consideration for wash water treatment. So a separate process would be in place to treat the waste from backwashing of the granular media filters, as well as the what they call the float or sludge that's scraped off the top of the dissolved air flotation process. So that all goes into a common process. The liquid stream would be treated and then recycled back to the plant. So that gives a high recovery rate or high efficiency through the plant and reduced water waste. But then the solids content of that would then be dewatered and or directly to the sewer, depending on the provision for dewatering and reducing that into kind of an organic cake material, which is often used for either landfill mixing in for organics or ground application, depending on the metals level within the material. Again, just a summary of the different technologies in which objectives they achieve, and you'll see with the surface water treatment process, there's a little bit more doubling up of, you have more barriers doing parts of similar objectives. Looking at the proposed treatment surface water treatment plant layout, the size of the surface water treatment plant is a little bit larger than the groundwater treatment plant. I think the groundwater was estimated at 1,600 cubic meters of footprint, and the surface water is estimated at 1,900. That's not, that's I think as expected, based on the configuration of the processes. And so, yeah, again, similarly, having provision to expand or accommodate the GAC in the future, if and when needed. And looking at the 2 treatment plant sites, we haven't gone into a lot of detail of the different locations on the golf course site, but I think we at a high level identified 2 potential locations depending on access and rock removal that could be considered at a future stage in design. But looking at the site adjacent to the existing 340 reservoir, it would not require repumping through the plant, whereas the option closer to the highway, Highway 3, likely would have low lift pumping after you go through the process, and you'd have to lift it back up to get into the reservoirs. One of the considerations for the surface water source development is the need to for a new pumping intake infrastructure. So analysis of the ground of the Osoyoos Lake and the water quality identified 30-meter depth as kind of the optimum water quality. That's very consistent with kind of the thermocline throughout the valley and other surface water intakes. So having some, that protects you from turnover events that happen seasonally with the temperature changes, as well as the algae depth is kind of ideal for being able to get kind of optimum water quality. So that puts it at about 200 meters off the shoreline. And so a new intake pump station and what will be required to accommodate that. Looking at different, this just to give context to what that could look like. Obviously constructing adjacent to the shoreline, you want sheet piling go down, and then you can either drill out into the water, or you can open cut, which is shown on the right hand side, and drop that pipe in and have the point of the point of this information presented here is just to show that there's going to be permanent considerations in working in water that would need to be accommodated as part of the construction of the new intake. Identified a raw water transmission main route. I understand there's an existing supply from the intake 8, but it would be undersized for the future domestic drinking water supply needs. So a new dedicated pipeline up to the proposed reservoir treatment site is suggested. And as you can see, there's a couple highway crossings, but for the most part, the configuration or the alignment of the proposed pipeline is more rural than the groundwater. Touched on all these points previously. So getting to the expected capital costs, we estimated at $51 million. Similar consideration on that cost for estimate in the spread. And then the expected operational cost being about $1.1 million. In operation cost between the two options is very comparable based on the level of estimate. So summary, comparing the different options, we kind of broke it down into a couple different categories to compare the value and consideration of the two different supply and treatment options. So from a groundwater perspective and source water availability, it's been able to meet the historic needs of the town to date. However, more reinvestment in the supply capacity is going to be needed going forward. And additional studies will be required to properly site and confirm the best location to extract that additional capacity. You would also be limited to a single source of the groundwater. You'd be continuing to invest in a source, and that would be your primary source of water. From the surface water perspective, it requires effectively a new investment to develop that surface water supply. However, you would benefit potentially being able to use the groundwater system as backup supply in the future if and when needed. Having two sources presents a lot of value from a resiliency perspective for a community. And based on that factor, we suggest that the surface water plant or surface water supply is preferred option for the town from a source water availability perspective. As far as raw water conveyance, both options kind of have their own complexities. The groundwater complexity has a little bit longer transmission main requirements to get a common raw water supply main out to the centralized treatment facility, and then refurbishment of the existing wells, and then running a pressurized main with multiple pumps with different kind of water elevations can be challenging. However, the surface water plants effectively requires a full new pump station intake and supply from the lake. And so, just given the level of effort to kind of develop a new source, we suggest that the groundwater is preferred from a raw water conveyance perspective. As far as treatability, I think it really comes down to the complexity of the groundwater supply and just the unique interactions between the water quality parameters present in groundwater, both of the metals and ammonia, and then also this connection, being a groundwater at risk containing pathogens. There's a strong connection to the surface water, so you're kind of treating the surface water through the ground. And then while it's coming and traveling through the ground, it's interacting with some additional parameters and contaminants that present treatment challenges. So from that perspective, the surface water, while it has potential for seasonal algae events, the treatment is for the most part, focusing on microbial removal and involves a really conventional treatment process. It's demonstrated to work reliably in this capacity elsewhere in the region. So from that perspective, we suggest that the surface water has a preferred from a treatability perspective. In the operations and maintenance, the groundwater system running the pressure filters, they're going to run for the most part in an automated manner, backwashing on a time cycle basis, and given the redundant train configuration with the biofilter followed by the manganese dioxide, this is expected to be a fairly robust and reliable process train to be able to treat the parameters that are there. There will be some management of the biofilter needed to kind of keep the health of that going, and that would probably be the focus of operational intervention and support. On the surface water side, there is more complexity in getting the coagulation chemistry right for the dissolved air flotation process to work effectively and subsequently the filters to work. So you have a few more, I would say a few more dials to operate on the surface water treatment plant, but with those additional dials, you're able to do more. So you have, it's more robust, you'd be able to reduce your organics and have a little bit more control of what you receive coming down the pipe or coming down the source, but it is a little bit more complex, and for that reason, we noted that groundwater is less complex and maybe favored from an operation maintenance perspective. And finally, summarizing the groundwater versus surface water capital costs. So there's about a $10 million savings in the surface water treatment costs, and a slightly lower operational cost associated with surface water plant, and for that, and therefore recommended from a lower capital and less of a cost consideration. In order to kind of benchmark or validate some of the costing information, thought it would be prudent to kind of look at some of the other plants of similar scope and scale to get a sense of, especially in consideration to, what we've seen in working with other utilities, we've certainly seen that waiting has not been a pathway to saving on capital infrastructure. And so kind of looking at escalation over the last few years, we've certainly seen prices increase dramatically. In 2019, we have plant numbers from 2019, 2020 that would have been kind of the earlier in the escalation phase. And so we use that to benchmark. We also have groundwater plants to benchmark down in the US and the Pacific Northwest. But effectively, the conclusion from comparative analysis of other cost per megaliter facilities in the region is that we're seeing a range of approximately $1.4 million per megaliter. The suggested midpoint of the proposed treatment here is at $1.2 million per megaliter, with a range of 0.8 to 1.7. So, from our perspective, it's landing kind of within a reasonable range as far as cost per megaliter of comparable plants in the region, and what we're seeing within the market, construction market, and the capital delivery market to date. And that recognizes inflationary factors of kind of 1.3. Bringing it home, from our analysis and looking at the source water development and treatment feasibility considerations, in consideration of the town's existing challenges with supply and treatment on the groundwater side, we identify the surface water supply and treatment as the preferred long-term solution for the community, both from a water supply resiliency perspective, as well as look at lower capital and operational cost impacts to the town.
Can you just go back one slide?
Absolutely. Oh. Hello.
Oh, here we go. Go back to you.
Page 72. We're at 140 or 155.
You like specifically on the cost compared?
Yeah, that way.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the last one before that, yeah.
Sure.
I'm just curious why our cost would, for treatment would be about 120 and Peachland's 145. Why would we be so much lower in today's cost?
So sorry, the 1.2 cost per megaliter compared to the 1.4?
The cost of treatment, the second one from the right there. You got us average about 121 and Peachland shows 145. So it was 145 back in 219 or is that like 224 price?
To today dollars.
So why would we be 20 cents cheaper than them?
So we place, well, we presented the numbers such that we showed our buildup number, which relates to that 1.2. Which ties to the 51 million. However, based on the level of the estimate, that range is 36 to 77. So we show a range of 0.8 to 1.7.
No, I would expect you just cut it in half and come up with 121, but I'm kind of compared to 145 at today's cost. Are they comparable sized plants? I guess would be a better question.
Yeah, so Peachland is,
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay.
so the Peachland facility is 25 megaliters per day. The Soyuz is being proposed at 32 megaliters per day at present, so Peachland would be a little bit smaller. So maybe a slight premium in cost associated with that, but for my understanding, the way we presented the numbers, the 1.2 and 1.4 is compared, they're comparable at this level of the cost estimate. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but
Well, it kind of makes sense, but you just told me their plant is smaller and ours is gonna cost less. It doesn't make sense on paper to me.
so no, sorry, that column, the second to the right, those are costs per megaliter, so that's a cost per volume of water produced. So it's a normalized value to compare between different facilities. Yeah, sorry, we misunderstood.
Can I just say thank you very much, first of all, for presenting this, and definitely we all have questions, so we'll let Councillor Chong go next.
Thank you. Just to follow up, it seems like, yeah, they just took the 27.5 divided by 25, then multiplied by the 1.32 inflation to get the $1.45. And I'm assuming there's just missing data for cost of conveyance and treatment, or else that would probably be added in as well, and then it'd be probably a bigger number.
Yeah, so Peachland and Rose Valley didn't have conveyance. The only year, the only project where we had like more similar to what would be planned for Asuyas, and this was surface water treatment. As Stephen alluded to, there was very limited groundwater. We do have some examples, but Comox it's very similar. So they have an intake, you needed a pump station, conveyance piping, and a treatment plant. And so it came in at 2.2. And again, it's a range. We haven't, 1.6 is the base cost, but given the level of detail, it's a range, and it all just depends on staging. There are many factors in the decision making that will go into the design that put you in that range. And it's also very coarse in the sense that we're not kind of normalizing, okay, how much piping Comox had or the complexity of Peachland or Rose Valley. So it's just to get a realistic, are we in the right ballpark? Are we close? And I think the cost estimate suggests that we are in the right ballpark, and going forward, the decisions that go into design will put us into that range of 0.1 to 1.17.
Yeah, we found this to add on to that, we found this to be particularly helpful given the uncertainty in the construction and escalation market in the last 2 to 5 years. It's been challenging to estimate, and so establishing some points of comparison are helpful to know you're in the right range.
And just to further that, like we wanted to make start with assumptions, similar assumptions, so that we're comparing apples to apples for the two options. So now as we move forward into detail, you're looking for savings and through staging, through decisions. And then the other uncertainty is the conservation, so landing on design that, or a value, a water demand value that kind of meets the future needs of the town.
Councillor Down?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. This might be a question more for Director Bernstein, but basically a couple of our biggest problems right now is the brown water and drinking water, and the hard water. And you're talking here about backwashing, and I'm just wondering, if we do this, does this get rid of the hard water and the brown water that's already in the system, that's in the pipes? Between the time we do this and we change it over, when the water comes in from the lake, I know it's not gonna have the manganese, so the brown water should go away, but we're still gonna have the pipes, we're still gonna be backwashing. Are we eliminating the hard water and the brown water?
So I can speak to, what's gonna be going into the pipe in the future. The hardness will be similar. Potentially a little bit lower, but similar. The groundwater vents, should reduce, and I think, this would obviously be on the operations side, but becoming ready to introduce a new water quality, a new, water characterization in your distribution system, we'd want to proceed that with, a series of flushing exercise to reduce whatever buildup you have within your existing pipe network, so that it doesn't carry on.
Go ahead, Kelly.
So the lake water hardness is actually quite a bit lower naturally. So it wouldn't need, it's pretty much perfect hardness level, so that would be one bonus. And also any treatment that we do either way, we'd have to do full heavy unidirectional flushing. It'd probably take us a year or two to completely clear out the pipes after the treatment plant's built, but once it's going, if it's lake water, there will never be brown water again.
Thank you.
Can I ask on the surface water conveyance network page, it's about 3, 4, 5 back from that page right there. And it has the map. If we were to put in the surface water from the intake down on the
Yep.
lake.
Correct.
Is it possible to, instead of the red line that you have there, is it possible to go up and go along Highway 97? Would that be an easier way to manage that? It's wider and it doesn't go through residential. It could go down and then up, but a lot of it, I just wondered if that had been considered.
Yeah, I would say at this level of the analysis, we didn't get into a lot of detail, comparing the different conveyance options. We picked an alignment that we thought had the least or limited impact, lowest cost impact, and try to move forward with that. But I think there's absolutely an opportunity to optimize how best to get from the proposed intake location to the proposed service, centralized treatment facility.
Okay, and one more, my assumption, if the lake water is not as hard, does that mean that people who have water softeners in their homes, which most people do, and the hardware stores and so on sell a lot of salt to go in that, which has other concerns, would that mean that that would not be necessary then?
Correct.
Oh, that's a good point. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Chong.
Thank you. I'm not sure the level of detail, so it would be like maybe on the next step. So in terms of refurbishment of wells, what's a process for refurbishment, and usually what's the cost consideration?
Yeah, so we discussed this with Western Water in the planning phase, and they identified a kind of a rough order of magnitude of $1 million a well to effectively go down, reinstate the screen, redo the pump, the pumping mechanics, and getting that up to capacity. So they're in a process of cleaning and reinstating the gravel and screen at the base of the well.
Thank you. And then in terms of conveyance, would there be considerations for cost, well, or realigning current piping as opposed to replace them entirely? There's a pretty large cost difference with that as well.
For sure, from so the biggest, I think, change in consideration for the groundwater supply system is that you're changing the hydraulics of the system are changing, completely in the sense that you're going from effectively a network with wells feeding into it all along the way to a common dedicated line to the centralized treatment. So, there might be sections of pipe that could be reutilized as part of that strategy, but you have to look at the distribution capacity as well to return that flow. So you're with a common centralized groundwater treatment system, you basically have to put a new dedicated line up to the centralized treatment, and then you would rely on your existing network and then bring it back and distribute through the system. Does that answer your question?
It does. So to summarize, essentially our current kind of distribution system, we could look at relining, but the new piping, and that's me, so there's really nothing we can do about that except for building it. And then it was pointed out that potentially there's a gravel pit across from Sand Dune by actually kind of right beside the proposed intake. It's about, I think,
The white spot there on the point, just to the right, through a point.
It's essentially Highway 97, there's the kind of white rectangle building, and then a little pond across, and then there's like kind of area there. Regardless,
Sure.
would that be a possible site for water treatment plants? Like, I know there's headlocks with pipeline, which means we'd have to basically pull pipe all the way into the town. But could that be possible?
So we were talking to Pierre and I were talking about this on the way down. I think I think the decision to move forward with either, deciding on groundwater versus surface water is kind of the first kind of big decision that needs to be made. And then I think the next big decision would be specifically around siting. There are probably a number of options depending on land costs, or if you wanted to consider land purchase as part of that. Or I think there's opportunity to optimize and identify the preferred site, but I think that'd be the focus of the next phase of investigation once you pick which source you want.
Two more questions. In terms of the sustainability of the Serious Lake, I know there's a lot of issues in northern BC with droughts and what normally rushing rivers are bone dry, which I'm sure generations have said that would never happen. So how sustainable would be our surface water supply?
From our assessment, the sustainability of the groundwater and surface water were effectively equivalent in the sense that the hydraulic connectivity between your aquifer and the lake is so strong that they would behave very similarly.
And with the current, well, I guess we're very early stage, but would there be considerations for just additional expansion if we go with surface water? And I use this as an example, potentially maybe regionalizing the water treatment plant so we could also service Oliver and potentially other municipalities as well. So if we can just add maybe like in Linear or something like that, is that a consideration?
So the surface water treatment plant option would be able to more readily accommodate those types of expansion or larger service areas.
And the final question, what's the next step from here?
As I said, I think that the town needs to decide which path to move forward. I think it would be difficult to continue to try to run these sources in parallel in analysis. And so I think making a decision on which source to invest in, and then I think the next step would be citing and really defining the scope that's going to be in that treatment approach would be my recommendation.
Thank you.
Councillor King.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. In both presentations, you showed you needed about 1.1 million to move forward. So what do you get, like in the 224 budget? So it didn't seem like it mattered which way we presented today, because you wanted to spend 1.1 million just over to do either one, so what were you getting for that money? Roughly speaking.
Through the,
I think that's a question for staff.
I don't understand. That's the operating operation. That's all, yeah. Getting operating costs rather than.
Oh.
Yeah, I believe it's up to, it, like, for instance, this study was substantially less than we thought it was going to be, so. That'll be. Sorry, that's the best way.
Yeah, I think the next level of investment, maybe speaks to your previous question, is I think moving forward into developing the preliminary design, which a preliminary design phase of this type of infrastructure, you try to establish some your key decisions. So you have a siting analysis, confirm where you want your future infrastructure, raw water supply and treatment. And then you refine your technology selection to effectively land on all of the big decisions within the scope. And then you would progress that into the subsequent phases of design. And as that progresses, you get more and more confidence and visibility into the actual cost of the project.
Okay.
So I guess if we made a decision to go to surface water, what type of budget do we need to move forward other than saying we want to go that direction?
Work.
No, it doesn't.
I think that was kind of my question too. What are we looking at in terms of money
Or at least get started.
this year, next year? How do we budget this? This is a little more than we would anticipate.
So to answer your question, your worship, to the council, the budget for this project is $52 million. That's the kind of funding that we're looking to move forward with. From a current budget perspective, you have a $9 million grant sitting in your coffers, and you also have already laid out, I think, $16.5 million worth of capital investment to a treatment facility of some sort. So right now, the budget has $16 million available to move to the next step. There will be requirements to up that budget to the 52 that has been provided in this presentation. So currently, there is funding to move ahead. The decision will be is whether or not council wants to move ahead with a surface water plant or a groundwater plant. And then the funding will need to be adjusted to accommodate one of those two scopes. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. So if we made a decision today, you would start next week, kind of moving that budget forward?
So as stated in the recommendation to the committee, basically the committee will be recommending to council that they move forward with the surface water plant at $52 million with a $1.1 million annual operating cost. Then the 5-year financial plan would come back to council to be adjusted to accommodate the new budget. So that would be the $52 million and how that $52 million could be solved.
Go ahead, Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just follow up on that. So we put 52 million into the budget, but that's going to go up and down, be adjusted each year as you get the actual numbers.
Yep.
So these are just budget numbers. We're not committing the town taxpayer to 52 million. We're committing them to the surface water as whatever it's gonna cost.
So you're not only committing to the surface water, but you are committing to a $52 million water treatment plant down the road. How you fund that is going to be the next steps. But you are committing to a $52 million water treatment plant. Decisions that are made today, because once you start walking down the path, there's no coming back. So we'll start to expend funding to move towards a surface water plant. What that looks like right now is we will look at spending what's within our budget from an operating perspective to continue the path forward. We are going to start conversations with the province to reallocate that $9 million to a surface water plant or a phased construction approach or whatever as we continue to have those discussions with Carlo. But yes, you are committing to $52 million and the council will need to support that $52 million. Now, whether or not it is supported via grant funding through senior level of government, or if that's supported through user fees, we don't have those answers for you at this point. But yes, council and the committee is committing to a $52 million fund.
So if it's over 52 million. Cause you're saying.
there's, again,
College interval.
there's always risk to this. There's risk to any construction right now. Unfortunately, nobody can predict construction costs at this point. So what'll end up happening is once we get to the point of final design, when we have probably 80% design done or whatever, those numbers will be refined, and yes, council may be approached for further funding. Or those numbers may be refined and the cost may come down because of some technology savings or whatever. These are very high level estimates at this point because of the uncertainty that is sitting there right now. So you are correct, that $52 million may go up, that $52 may come down. Hence the spread in the estimate provided for Carlisle from 32 million all the way up to 98. The uncertainty is still there because we haven't had the opportunity to define the scope to the point where construction costs are better realized.
Yeah, just one more comment. So if we don't do it and we stay with wells, then basically we're probably gonna spend 52 million anyway, because we're gonna have to redo those wells. We don't have a choice.
So to go groundwater, it's a minimum of 61 million. So you're spending $10 million more just on the treatment aspect. That does not take into account well reverberation, it does not take into account standby generators, it does not take into account. That is strictly to provide you with a groundwater treatment plant and transmission mains to that groundwater treatment plant. This doesn't address the other things, and then the budget would have to be reconsidered to reflect refurbishing those wells at $1 million a pop. The budget would have to be changed to reflect standby generation in all our wells. The budget would have to reflect to, other things, so I'm spitball one right here now, but 10 wells, once 9 and 10 or 10 and 11 come online, you're looking at $8 million is the refurb what you have, you're looking at another, 1 to 1.2 for each new well you bring online. Gensets will bring in $150,000 to $200,000 a site, so there's costs that are gonna continue to go up as you continue down the path of groundwater.
Thank you for your explanation.
Can I just ask, I know that we have 16.5 million right now, which we can use to start with. Mr. Zackel, how easy is it for us to be able to get, certainly we'd apply for grants, but what about borrowing? And is there a limit to the amount we can borrow? Can it be a certain amount borrowed each year? How does that work? Thank you.
Yeah, so our liability issuing only allows us to borrow up to 30% capacity of our revenues. Anything over and above that, we would have to seek inspector municipalities approval on our borrowing. So that would be part of our process. Number one, we would be trying to get additional grant funding to support these additional costs. I think that would be our number one priority. The second one is securing the remaining funding. And yes, we would probably end up sending the borrowing bylaw as it's going through the process off to the inspector municipalities for approval, because it probably would take us over our threshold of borrowing.
Thank you. Councillor King.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. One last question. Do you see it difficult to work with the provincial or federal government if we decide to go with the lake?
There's always going to be challenges in dealing with senior levels of government. We don't know what those challenges look like in the time requirements to facilitate those challenges. So the permitting process would start instantaneously, and those conversations would be happening, within weeks to finalize what needs to be done from a permitting perspective. There's probably a lot of interesting paths that we'll have to walk down in order to make this spot happen.
Go ahead, Mr. McDonald.
I wanted to say too, it'll be easier now because we have skin in the game and we're paying closer to our fair share of taxes, so it will look very favorably on that.
Go ahead, Councillor John.
Thank you. Not so much questions, more so clarification. In terms of the estimates, the class 4, it is an international standard to the best of my knowledge. And class 4 is more so for the early stage studies, and then it goes 3, 2, and 1 it's more information, we have more of an accurate number. And then in addition, it was real good to see that inflation and projections were adding to the cost as well. And my understanding, I believe also with Corollo, 1,000 employees, from what I can see, one of the top rated engineering firms that only focus on water and wastewater treatment. So this study is fantastic. So I just want to thank you again.
Thank you both very much for presenting this and giving us a lot of things to think about. Certainly, we're going to have to make a decision, of course. Considering the fact that we have a lot of homes that are wanting to be built and that the government is requiring that we build more homes, I think it is definitely important for us to look at ways that we can make that happen efficiently and carefully and safely for our town. And obviously, having a good supply of water is important to allowing a lot more homes being built here. So thank you. Go ahead, Councillor.
With that said, I'd like to move option 2. Which is move to surface water system, construct a surface water treatment facility.
Thank you. It's been seconded by Councillor King. So the motion that is right there, including the whole motion. Oh, just option 2. Okay, right, that would be on the first page here as including the financial plan, just the motion. All right, that's right here. Move to a surface water system and construct a surface water treatment facility. Just that part we're voting on. Or that we look at recommendation to the 5-year financial plan be reviewed and updated. Is that part of the motion?
Yes.
Okay, so in the options up at are up at the top and that's at the bottom, which is why it's confusing. Yeah. So that's option 3. So option 2 is just that we have moved to the surface water system and construct a surface water treatment plant. That's it, not including the part in option 3. It is a little bit confusing, I agree.
Yeah, it's worded along.
Yeah.
I was just looking at the options and discussion, so option 2 just for surface water. So I guess it would be option 3 technically.
It would be if we're including the rest of it.
So your worship, there's 3 options.
Yes.
For the committee, staff is recommending option 3, which is in the recommendation box.
That is the option.
Okay, so you're moving option 3. Are you seconding that? Thank you. Is there any other concerns? Anybody like to? All right, so I will call on the motion. All in favor? Thank you, that's carried. Thank you very much. Now we've got to start picking up pop bottles on the side of the road. Go ahead, Mr. McDonald.
Sorry, I had one more thing I was gonna say, the lake water choice also isn't much more inherently flood proof. But now we don't have to flood proof all the various wells around town. Just a little point.
Well, we might have to for a couple of years because we're not going to get it built right away. Thank you. Okay, next is decommissioning secondary suites. And it's Mr. Zackel. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Zackel.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So before council is consideration for dealing with secondary suites that wish to or that are no longer wanting to use their properties as a secondary suite, wanting to get the second utility charges off, and we're wanting to have a fair and consistent approach of how to deal with that. So currently, the town of Vesuvius doesn't have a written policy on how to decommission a secondary suite, and we've been utilizing the RDS's recommendations which are quite stringent and quite expensive to our property owner. So what we're wanting to do is we have the building inspector do a review of 20 other municipalities to come up with what they do, how they do it. None of them really have written policies in place. But the one that we're recommending is coming from Lake Country, which basically what they do is they have the property owner do a submission of statutory declaration saying that they're no longer using it as a secondary suite. As well as there's a building permit that's taken out to ensure that the property, the secondary suite no longer has a door or entrance. So if there is, it's just created into an open way, so that there isn't that separation. That's a recommendation from staff is that we go to the milder approach for decommissioning, to make it less onerous on the taxpayer. We don't want to lose that ability of the secondary suites for the future as well, so.
Thank you, and I know that this has been brought up several times at the RDOS, so I've heard this conversation before. I do know the odd place that has had the building inspector in and decommissioned a suite, and then it was commissioned again once the building inspector left. And I'm not suggesting that's common. I'm just wondering, how have some of these other communities dealt with that? And I think that one of them, I think it's in Mission, and it says, I understand that City of Mission reserves the right to do a future inspection to verify that the SDU remains exempt. Have we thought of that, or do you think that's gonna be a concern?
Well, it's always a concern. But, you know, our biggest thing that we've utilized is usually if they're renting up these secondary suites, they're needing the additional services for waste collection and that bylaw enforcement. We deal with calls with respect to issues happening within the town. Same thing with building inspector, when we have to have something to inspect, we find out about it, we send our building inspector out to inspect it. So it will be something that would have to be sort of monitored. But we would also have things in place to bill through MTI, through charging the user fees once again for the entire year. Once we find out that they've been on for a couple of years, we'll charge them those utilities for those couple of years.
Thank you. And I'm just thinking, wouldn't many places who have the ability to have a secondary suite want to use that to get, to me, it would be, if I had something like that, I'd be happy to provide a place and get some extra income. And because we're certainly looking at those types of things in town, aren't we? Lots of people.
And there is quite a number that are going to remain that way. I think what we're looking at is there's just a few one-offs where you've got a property owner that doesn't want to lose their property. They're at that stage where it's just their family home and things of that nature. So that they're not and they're not even utilizing it as a secondary suite. But the way it's built and the way it's worded, it'll charge them.
Sure.
So it's just giving them the ability to take that out and then also have it so that the cost for making the modifications to their property aren't onerous.
Thank you. Councillor King.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think it would be important to put in that we did do a follow-up. We might never do a follow-up, but I think it would be important to put it in there that we're allowed to do a follow-up. I think that would be important.
And that can be added in for absolutely for sure.
Okay, council, what is your thought on this one? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll move option one, maybe add that other stipulation that people will follow.
Which is similar to the city of Mission
Yeah.
sentence that's in there. Is that okay? Yeah, they can do it. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Chong.
So,
Yes.
just for clarification, follow-up inspection, is that annually, is that in 2 years?
I don't think you'd have to,
No.
I don't think you'd have to put a date on it, just follow inspection.
Okay.
Well,
It's on the City of Mission page, which is a couple over, page 149 of 155. And it's up at the top. It just says, I understand the City of Mission reserves the right to do a future inspection to verify that. So just reserving the right, but not necessarily asking the same it'll be done once a year. Yeah, okay. And so it's been moved and seconded. And are you okay with that? All in favor? Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And next we have Mr. Risling on the Quarterly Council Strategic Priorities Chart.
Thank you, your worship. Thank you, your worship. As council is aware, shortly after the election, council went through a process to establish some priorities to not only provide administration with some direction on how to budget and formulate some reports, but also provide some transparency to the public and what are the things that council is really interested in. This has come forward quarterly. There was a bit of delay during the budget process. There was a motion made by council that they preferred to hold off on debating or discussing the quarterly updates until the budget was passed. And as we all know, last council meeting, the budget was passed. So what we have in front of you is the strategic priorities chart. Attachment 1 provides an overview as to the existing priorities chart and the status update. As you can see, just what everything was delayed, and the reason for that was the elongated budget debate. So pretty much everything has been delayed. I indicated that to council on previous occasions that and nothing, very little is being done behind the scenes other than budget over that extended period of time. The infrastructure strategy, there are no proposed changes to that, or it's basically been the same for I think the last 3 reviews. Attachment 3 is the one that's maybe more for the discussion. So attachment 3 includes kind of update as to what's transpired over the last little bit, and revised timelines provided by administration. I do want to put a caveat on this. Again, there's been a lot of things that have occurred over the last 6 to 8 months that were unanticipated from an administrative perspective. And we are having additional staff losses that just last week, another one of our superintendent of utilities, who was at the council meeting earlier, handed in his resignation. So yeah, we're in a situation where we're losing a lot of staff, and therefore I put some huge asterisks beside even the items that are here. We're going into operations period where our population's booming, so typically what happens during the next 3 to 4 months is it's all hands on deck just to deal with operational issues. And then we would obviously move into the fall where maybe there is some time to deal with more of the council priorities. So again, provided some dates here, but again, I put a huge asterisk beside them. Because again, losing staff, we haven't had a tremendous amount of success so far to date in filling them. And I'm not, hopefully it will be, but there hasn't been a lot of success to date. So that puts additional pressures on the few that are remaining. And I'll leave that, that open, and council can take a look and provide some options or recommendations on as to what you'd like administration to work on.
Thank you very much. Can I just, on attachment 3, under the planning and development, the zoning bylaw, that they draft the short-term rental program terms and implementation by May the 1st. And I'm understanding that that has now been adjusted, so it's not now, it's now November the first.
So there are a few things happening here, so. The provincial program actually comes into play May 1st. However, there's still some detail that need to be worked out there. Number two is our zoning bylaw has not changed, so even though a program is coming to play May 1st provincially. We do not have the zone to accommodate this, so we still have to proceed that process, and Mr. Garish, got some input from council, I think it was 2 or 3 committees ago, as to what your wishes were as far as the zoning. So we still do not have the ability to implement short-term rentals until the zonings occurred. We are hoping, there's a meeting with Urban Systems, who's basically taken the lead on this whole project. That meeting is later this week to flush out some of the next steps and come to council. There's a ton of steps that still are required. Business licensing, decisions on whether we're going to do inspections, fire inspections, the licensing process in itself. So there is a ton of work to do, and I think we're gonna be pretty much flying here. You know, kind of a reactionary mode for the next few months, but I think it's clear right now, even though there's legislative framework for it, we do not have the zoning for it, and therefore, as of now, or even May 2nd, there really is no legalized short-term rentals within the cities.
Okay, thank you. I heard that on the news the other day that the people that had opted in now had the ability to not deal with it May 1st, but it was November 1st. But I was in my car and it was on the radio, and so I could have got that mixed up.
Yeah, Your Worship, I think one of the things the province was talking about on November 1st was that's when some of their support was gonna be coming. I think that there was some requirements from municipalities to provide them with data. But I believe it's November 1st that they're anticipating there's going to be that assistance from an oversight or tracking perspective. That's my understanding, but I'm hoping that Urban Systems, it can come very soon to committee to provide us with a bit of an update on what some of the recommendations they have as far as implementation. I think it's gonna be a very difficult task this year. I'm not sure how we're gonna actually do it and implement it, but get more information to come. I think that's definitely one that has significant risk associated with it, and council does not have the information required, I think, to really make some good decisions at this point.
Thank you. So, council, are there any other of the priorities on this chart that you want to discuss or bring up, or are you okay with the new timelines that are on there? Go ahead, Councillor Chong, and then Councillor King.
I think the biggest key for these priorities really is how much manpower we have. We have the capacity to even complete any of these, like, even if we prioritize them. The timelines are gonna be skewed, because we need breathing humans in this room or in this building, which we don't. What I would probably suggest is the medical professionals recruitment, we do shift that to advocacy and partnerships. Because we have made several attempts to get some feedback and to pave the way forward, but they've been basically had no feedback, so. And then with Bill 44, the zoning bylaw, that seems like it's already, it's in the works, we have a timeline. And then even in terms of the communications officer position, we have a lot of other positions that I feel take significant more priority before we can even think about the communications officer, or maybe we can amalgamate that, so potentially another position can take some of that role, but for now, I like to see on the priorities chart, number 1, shift it to advocacy and partnerships. And probably still potentially shift the communication officer's position down into the next column. Because I mean, if he's in charge of bylaw, that needs to take priority. Yeah, that's what I think.
Sure. Councillor King, did you have your hand up? Okay.
Yeah, I did, thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess my question, which way we move here, would you be back in 3 months kind of with an update?
Your worship, yes, it's our intent to continue coming back to council quarterly by updates.
Anybody else have anything they wanna? I think the water metering billing that's down there, is certainly something that needs to stay on there. And, investigating separate billing, so, I see that it's coming up later, so we'll talk about that later. And I agree, the summertime in Vesuvius is, not only do we have a lot of people here and lots of operations that are being, having to deal with and events and that type of thing, but it's also a time when many of our staff like to, take holidays, so, we normally, have, things that are slowing down during the summer, so we've got a couple of months to get some of these things, started anyway. And hopefully we can, manage through the summer without, droughts or floods or any of the natural disasters. I hear there's about 169 fires burning in the province at this point, which is pretty scary for April, isn't it? However, the one closest to us was put out quickly, and so that's a good thing. Anybody else have anything to say? Okay, so did you need us to make a recommendation, so Councillor Chung, did you want to make one of the options and make a recommendation on what your suggestion was? That we move the communications officer down at the moment, is that one of them?
Yep.
Yeah,
And then shift the medical professional recruitment down to advocacy and partnerships.
Yeah. That's number one on the list, yeah. We have talked to the doctors many times and invited them to come and have a meeting with us. And they have not got back to us about this, so they're obviously pretty busy, and we will continue to advocate to the ministers on this. Go ahead, Councillor.
Just gotta ask a question. Under next, you got fees and charges for the bylaws, aren't we? Were you doing that right now?
Through your worship, we have been updating some fees and bylaws along the way, there's still more to do. So I think that's why it's still there, we've been administratively moving on some of those.
Well, that's why just a question. We're gonna move 2 down. I just wondered if maybe that would move up because you're kind of moving through that one.
I think it's a slow process.
Yeah, I understand.
So, I mean, you can, but again, it is gonna be very.
Yeah, you can put a date on it.
Low.
Yeah.
Well, we're doing it piecemeal.
Yeah.
We did some, like late last year, it's okay with water,
Mhm.
we've got recreation fees that need to be looked at, so it's. You wanna move it, plug it away slowly. And just for clarity.
Yes,
So communications officer was the recommendation to put it down into the next box, so it's kind of come off the top box, so for clarity.
Yeah.
The next box. Okay.
And then that's going on.
and the medical into advocacy, so that's number one. Yeah. And number 4 that have been moved. Yeah. Which leaves us with 2, 3, and 5, is that? Thank you. Is that, okay if we just have 3 there for now, or do we need to move something up, or?
No, I think, your worship, this is your document, I think councils, understand, I think the horsepower availability. There's still some things within the budget that are gonna be worked on, you just heard, hour and a half presentation on water, there's gonna be a ton of work being completed on that. Council's aware of, we have the OHS audit that's, going to be commencing here fairly soon, which is gonna take an incredible amount of time from the organization, so there's lots of other things going on that aren't even on this list that are gonna significantly impact their ability to complete tasks portion that council and then the community really wants us to complete.
Okay. Anything else? So if we can leave it like that for now, and you'll bring us back another report in a couple of months. Okay, so, can we take a vote on those options that we've identified?
Yes. Yeah,
I'm moving that.
Yeah, I moved it. There was something.
Sorry, Counselor. Marika, second. Thank you. All in favor? Thank you, everybody. That's passed, and we will now go back to,
All right.
thank you, first and second termination.